We are not sponsored by Chick-fil-A, but hey everyone, welcome back to Honest to God. I'm co-host Ricky, joined by
your second co-host, co-host, Mick Michael Branda. I'm going to have a new name every episode, I think. I just got to come up with it on the spot, though. Last time it was M-Dog. This time, Mick Michael. And I got the gold chain on this time, so it's like a different level of respect.
Oh,
it's like a sheesh. It's like a. I'll put it in the teeth. Like
sheesh.
Is that real? Oh yeah, it is.
Did you hurt your teeth?
I actually did kind of hurt a little bit.
You know, there's wisdom in the generations. Like there's a lot of different types of wisdom. Yeah. Like you shouldn't always put everything in your mouth.
I mean, yeah.
You shouldn't. just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I don't even know.
Which this leads us into bridging the generation gap. That's what we're talking about today for episode 4. And I think this topic is really, really interesting. When it comes to, we're thinking about millennials and Gen Z, they're very common in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. They want a lot of the same things, but they're also both very much so declining when it comes to percentages in attending church. Yeah. And it gets even worse in Gen Z. From my experience when it comes to generational like gaps and stuff like that, it's kind of weird. Like it's weird to come into a church and like my thought early stages, like first time coming to church and stuff like that, like I didn't want to be around older people. Like I had my youth pastor, like I had like the interns and all that stuff, but they were like not old, like they were like adult, matured, like what I thought was for like being in college, whatever. Like those were like adults where I was like, oh well, they're older than me kind of thing, so like I'll listen to them. But it always felt weird, or I always felt like out of place when I was around the older generation. So this would be like baby boomers or the early Gen X, where I just didn't feel like, I just felt like I was looked down upon a lot in my own personal experience, or like I was looked at like, oh, you're just like a stupid kid.
Oh, okay.
Like you don't know life. And it's like, yeah, well, of course, like you lived life.
Yeah.
I think you said that to me on a past episode where like you lived more of a life. And I'm like, yeah, for sure. But so that's always been like kind of like my experience. Like I was always nervous too to go to the older generation and be like, hey, like this is what I struggle with, and them saying like, well, why are you struggling with that? Like that's stupid, just do this. I probably would figure out things a lot faster if I went to wiser older counsel than just someone who's like 2 years older than me and I think that they're an adult and stuff like that, and they're really not. But I don't know, what about you?
Well, I feel like just like along those lines, I've never necessarily had anything specifically like when we're talking about like, so obviously we're talking about like context of church.
Yep.
Like millennials and Gen Z pretty much both want the same thing. Yet both of our numbers seem to be declining, at least from what we can tell. And like I've never necessarily felt like I've had any like issues personally with the generation above me, but I feel like kind of like we've mentioned before, I've just never felt like there's been any sort of necessarily need for me to have a relationship with them. At least that's how I used to think. It was like, oh, I don't really need, like I don't have any issues with you, but like why would I talk to you? Like I didn't really have a reason. Like why talk to you when I have things like YouTube, or if I want to get things done, like, well then I'm just gonna tell my Instagram page what my complaint is and hope it gets fixed. Like, you know, like... Yeah,
like you'll individually, like you'll do it yourself.
Yeah.
Like this is something like I don't need to rely on anyone. I can just figure this out myself.
Yeah. And so like, it's not like when you're talking about like, you kind of had like with the generation above you, it was almost like there was like a little bit of like a disconnect. Whereas like, I'm not even sure there's necessarily a disconnect with my generation and yours. It's just like, I don't really feel like I need to talk to you. Like I don't have anything wrong with you. I don't think that you are disrespectful or rude towards me in any way. I just am like, why talk to you when I could do it myself?
Right. And I think there's a lot of different emotions or feelings that go into that, especially with me being around young people a lot. or people around your generation that, like that I work with and stuff like that, it's always the B word.
Yes.
Burden. Burden.
I was wondering where we were going. I was
there's always this feeling of like, well, I don't want to ask this older person because I'll be a burden, or like I'll be someone who they may think I'm not like self-sustainable, or I'm not independent, or like I can't take care of myself. At least that's some of the things that I've heard when working with like people that are Gen Z.
Yeah.
And when millennials, like that's definitely what it is. Like I didn't want to inconvenience anyone to try and help me. Like I didn't start driving until I was 19 years old. You know how much of an inconvenience and how much of a burden I felt when I had to rely on my friends to drive me to church or drive me to places. Yeah. Like that was real, and that was more real with the older generation. Yeah. And I think a lot of times the older generation's intention is like, no, we don't actually feel that way, or like we don't think you're a burden. We're actually like almost begging for you to talk to me.
Yeah.
And it's like we have all these generations that are just missing the connection piece. And it's like, man, like why is it so hard to connect with them? But also at the same time, why is it sound so easy just to go up to someone and say, hey, my name is so-and-so. Mm-hmm. Like, who are you? Mm-hmm. Like, and I think we can learn so much through storytelling, which we do. And we've seen that it's been proven through like stories, and how stories are what kind of like teach us things and stuff like that too. And we can learn a lot from like our older generations as well. But there's that stigma, like there's a stigma with like baby boomers, and there's a stigma that we have with like the older Gen X, that like we're not going to live up to what they have, And sometimes too, we're worried by this idea of like, we don't want to hear about the experience they went through, because the experience they went through does not exactly seem the same as what millennials are going through currently in the world, and what Gen Zs are going through currently in the world. But in the church, you would think it'd be easier. Yeah. But it's not. Yeah. I find myself more gravitated to wanting to be around people around my age. You probably find yourself in the same way around your age, to where it's kind of like that awkward side look, and we see an older person in church, and it's like, well, why? Why can't we go with them and have a conversation with them just like we have a conversation with our own? So
yeah, no, I completely agree. And so like with that being said, as far as like we can identify maybe some issues we may or may not have with like the generation above us, but like within the context of like church, like we've already kind of said that like we both kind of want the same thing, and that's more of Jesus, more authentic moments, more time spent with the Holy Spirit, more time, like, more community, more fellowship. Yeah. Like that seems to be the recurring theme between the both of us, at least from what I can tell through conversations that I've had with people online or in person. So we have these same things that we're pursuing, yet our numbers are like rapidly declining, and more people are coming up on their Instagram page going, I got hurt by the church. More people are coming out going, church isn't for me anymore. Yeah. I'm just going to be a Christian from home. Yeah. Or I'm transitioning to online church. Yeah. So like why do we have these same values and same dreams that obviously God is instilling in both of us if they're both the same thing? It sounds like we just want more of him. Yet we also seem to have zero ambition to work with each other, to even sit down with one another, to actually pursue more of the kingdom of heaven, and yet we just seem to be falling apart. We seem to be falling away. And so, like, why is that?
Yeah, and I think some of the things that I run into in my own experience is, like, it is really that burden piece. Like, I also don't trust. Like, I don't trust anyone as well. Like, and I think that's a personal problem that a lot of people might have, not sure. Like we might say like, hey, like I trust you, but I think deep down we're like, no, I don't trust you with this responsibility. Yeah. Like I don't trust that you can handle this, or you can do this efficiently or effectively, or in the timing that I need it to be done, maybe. And I think what happens a lot is because we have these individual feelings, like we have to individually do these things all by ourselves. It naturally separates us, right? Like, no, like this is, I'm going to not allow someone else's opinion decide what I want to do, right? So I'm not going to let, like, I don't want to go, I honestly lost my train of thought. I'm not going to be honest.
Well, I'll pick it back up.
Yeah,
you were talking about this idea of like, oh, I have like this lack of trust.
Yeah,
and,
lack of trust.
And I was just like, it immediately like clicked something in my head. I remember seeing, we had a guy come into town, Jacob, and when he was talking was talking about Gen Z, and one of the statistics and ideas that he talked about was the lack of trust that Gen Z has with not just the local body of Christ, but even leaders, that being millennial leaders and X and boomer leaders. So like I have his notes pulled up.
Yeah.
4 out of 10 Gen Z trust the church.
Yeah.
And 2% of Gen Z that was in church during the pandemic said that a church leader checked up on them while they were during the pandemic lockdown.
You said only 2%?
2%.
2% of Gen Z that were attending.
That are in church.
In church. 2% said that they were actually checked on by a leader.
So like,
that's huge. That's a huge problem.
Yeah. And I think that there's a 98% gap right there between generations of leadership. And I feel like we've almost like zeroed in on part of the problem. It's that we don't trust anybody but ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's
even that's dangerous.
And not only is it dangerous, but that seems like even coming out of my mouth, I'm like, I don't trust anybody but myself to pursue the kingdom of heaven right.
Yeah.
Like I don't trust anybody but my generation, my peers, to do it the way that we think we should do it.
But we don't. But at the same time, like how true is that? Because we'll trust whatever the guy on YouTube says. Yeah. We'll trust whatever the guy says on Instagram. Reels will say. We'll trust whatever the guy that says something in 240 characters says.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah. Oh man, that's crazy.
You know, but we say no. We have this inclination, or like we have this feeling like, no, I can't trust someone who's literally physically in front of me.
Yeah.
Or like I can't give them the burden of or be vulnerable with this person or what I struggle with because I don't trust what they're going to do with the information I shared about me because my image is going to be damaged. Maybe I don't know. That's just a thought that comes in my head. Like we're so millennials too. Like we so think that we can just like. I think, and like I can be 100% wrong. We have this idea that like we know how it has to be.
Yeah.
We have like we know everything. We know what we're supposed to do. And realistically, when I think push comes to shove, like we're scrambling just like everyone else and probably just like the generation before us who had to also try and figure it out instead of what would have been like if we just unified, you know?
Yeah. What unity being unity being ultimately like the David and the Goliath of trust scenario. Like the solution, it sounds like, to working through this trust issue we all seem to have, and I for some reason like trust kind of feels like it's like both at the same time the right and the wrong word. Like I don't trust people, but it also sounds like I don't believe in like my peers, or like the people above me. Like I didn't like, it's almost like a like as I was reading, like after like, so for example, it's shown that when I buy things from H&M, the first thing I look at is quality. The second thing I look at is brand integrity. And like almost every time when they were looking at businesses, they were looking at this in young people. It was a study that was done of what they look for when they buy from businesses. Almost every time, either the first or the second response that young people would give is, I look at the brand integrity. And so it's almost like, not only do I not trust you, but it's like when they're looking at leaders, when we're looking at the church, like I feel like young people are also like, looking at your integrity. And it almost sounds like not only do they not trust you, but it sounds like they don't believe in you. And that's crazy.
Yeah. And like, what is it that Gen Z wants? You know, like what are they wanting from church like right now? And I think a lot of it is the same cries that millennial want. Yeah. Like I think in the beginning with us millennials, and we said it in previous like episodes, like we were really bored and like church was not appealing to us. But at the same time, like I think we're chasing the same thing, and that's authenticity, like genuine, real, like make this real, right? Like like we all have like our individual walks and our journeys and like what our faith is like and what our relationship like is in Christ. But like if we're preaching to go into the nations and we're not doing that, then it comes off as fake. Yeah, you know. And I think a lot of millennials that are actively using, you know, social media and sees these feeds, or even Gen Zs that are seeing these feeds, like they're not buying it. Yeah. You know, and then at times too, when they're saying like it's too showy or it's too performancey, it's like, what are you selling me? You know, what are you trying to sell me into? And I think there's all these like bad stigmas too. Yeah. Following around where like the world kind of takes these concepts out of context and stuff like that too. And then like we have to like do a dance to explain like the genuineness of, or like the real intentions of why we do the things we do. Yeah. But
It's when you were talking about like selling it to me, that's crazy. I was just thinking like how more often than not, church social media pages or even probably like websites are often probably pitching church to people. Here's why you should come to my church. It's almost like trying to sell people your Sunday morning service. And like, that's definitely the huge difference I feel like between my generation and your generation and the people above us would be that don't sell me your Sunday service. I just want Jesus. And I think that's the common thread that you and I both have is, well, we want more of Jesus. We want more authenticity. We're not working together because we don't believe in one another and we don't trust one another. So what is our next step forward now that we've identified the two problems that seem to be here?
Yeah, I think it starts with ourselves, and we have to realize, like, man, like, we can't do this alone. Like, there's no way we can expect to do this alone. I think we have to get rid of some of the pride that we have and really humble ourselves. Like, what would it look like for someone, a Gen Z, to go ahead and invite an older Gen X to hang out? Like, what would it take? Why have we not done that?
Yeah.
You know, in the same way, like with a millennial, like inviting a Gen Z to come hang out, or inviting like to do fellowship, like we talked about in like a previous like episode before. Like, what is stopping us from doing that except for ourselves? Yeah. We're the ones stopping it. We're the ones that are preventing that fellowship, that unity to happen, because we have these mixed conceptions of what the other generation believes of us. And we have no idea because we haven't actually been in the same room with them. Yeah. Or we've been in the same room, but we're so far away on the other side of the room that we don't even give them a chance. Yeah. We have these assumptions and all that stuff on them. And like, what if we just didn't? What if we just went? Like, what if we just went to them and talked to them to fix those problems and identify like, hey, maybe I do have a problem. And, you know, this is hitting me too, like thinking me too, like I do this too. Like, I'm still to this day, like, I'm a little nervous to like talking to someone who's older than me and stuff like that. Or it's like, oh man, I don't want to be hanging around that crowd. But like the moments that I do, every time, the moments that I do talk to someone that is older than me, I am enriched with wisdom. I am enriched with life lessons. I'm enriched with and blessed by like their relationship with God and how they are so close to God and they've done it a lot longer than I have even. Or even if they haven't, you know, like how much they're just fully sold like on Jesus. What about you? What do you think?
Sorry, I was enthralled in what you were saying.
What a word.
I appreciate the encouragement to go and talk to people that are older than me. I feel like that's kind of what I was just receiving from you. Like, what can easily be perceived as wasted time. You've just kind of shown and reminded me that it's only beneficial anytime you've ever spent with anybody, a generation older than you. And I think it's so easy to disregard that. I'd rather, do 1,000 other things, but if I could take one of my 365 days of my year and spend it with, maybe someone from X or Boomer, whatever it might be, then I don't know. I wonder how differently it might change my not just my life, but like, my perspective on how I build relationships with people on a Sunday morning at church. If I actually, commit to investing more into all sorts of people instead of the box that I've put myself in by only talking to young people. Yeah,
because, we've talked about iron sharpening iron too, right? That also includes like older generations too. Like, just like how we talk about, I think it's 1 Peter 2 verse 9. No, that's not right. The verse that talks about, you're not too young, right? Like in the same way, like, you're not too old. Yeah. Like we all have things that we offer to the kingdom of God and we offer to each other and encourage each other and uplift each other to go through hard times. There's no one better than people that have lived through it. Yeah. If not more. And there's multiple different ways that I think the church can do it. Like if with ourselves as well, individually, like, hey, if your church offers like, multi-aged groups, like discipleship groups or small groups or whatever like that, like take a risk and join one. Yeah. Like, what is it going to hurt? Yeah. Like learning different perspectives or not, or like intentionally going out to those on Sunday mornings and building a relationship. Yeah.
Or almost like I wonder like, oh, I have my young adults group. Let's invite a boomer to come in and speak to all these young people. Yeah. So I feel like even something like that. I also, every time I say boomer, I feel like I'm being mean, but I'm not being mean.
No.
I don't know. Is there something else I can call that generation? Or is that okay to say? I feel like boomers hate being called boomers.
Well, I mean,
tell us
in the comments if you hate it. Yeah.
I'm gonna call you that.
What's another way of
I'm
calling?
not trying to be mean. If you think that's
the
offensive.
intention is not to be mean, but it's to classify. It's to classify the generational gaps that we have that are in from the years of just existence. So, I think some things that we can do to really bridge this gap is we need to really check ourselves and reflect too. Is this pride that's like ticking in, that's like spewing in, that's making me not want to go and talk to another generation or not? Because this is the reality. Like, I really think with Gen Z and millennials right now, like, I really do believe they're going to make a huge difference in the world. Not saying this does not invalidate or make, baby boomers or Gen Xers or anything like that. This does not make them invalid, because they are also part of the change. But I think the reality of this is that Gen Z wants people to go. And right now, millennial wise, like, we're not in the church, or we're confused ourselves where we think like, oh man, it's okay not to even go into church sometimes. Like we're okay with like saying like accepting things that are like biblically sound that we know that we shouldn't, but here we are wanting the same thing that Gen Z want, but we're not going. We're not going into the streets. Like, we're not going, or at least it's not a lot. I don't know.
Yeah. And those things are like, ministering in every sphere, evangelizing, pursuing the kingdom of God. I think that just to pull all of this into like the Bible.
Yeah.
I was talking to you before we started this episode, but like even this idea of like bridging the generational gap, like finding that the problem is that, we'll have a problem with trust, and we have a little trouble believing in one another. We have a little trouble pursuing a relationship with one another. There is a divisive, it's almost like factions are formed. We're the young people, you're the old people. Let's keep our groups separate. We'll do what we want to build the kingdom of God. We'll do it how we like it. And the same thing for you. And the thing that it just reminded me of is 1st and 2nd Corinthians, where like Paul is writing the church of Corinth, and literally Corinth has a lot of problems.
Yeah.
That's why they got 2 letters.
No.
That's why they got 1st and 2nd Corinthians, because they got a whole lot of problems.
Got that 1-2 piece.
But one of the most consistent problems is they're all divisive. They're forming groups.
Yeah.
And developing opinions, and they're arguing with one another, and they're doing the opposite of building the church.
Yeah.
They're building up their groups. They're building up their little circles.
Yep.
And I feel like that's almost where we find ourselves with our like generations. It's almost like we have different, hey, don't step in a youth group. Youth group is for the middle schooler, high schoolers. If you're over the age of 30, go somewhere else. Like, hey, welcome to young adults. If you're in college and you look young, cool, you can come here. But if you are not hip and not cool, I'm gonna need you to get as far away from the young adults as you possibly can. Like, I feel like that's kind of what I feel like the treatment we sometimes have is, and when Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, he says, blah, 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 blah. Let there be no divisions in the church. Rather be of one mind, united in thought and purpose. For he then goes on to say, I'm being told about your quarrels. You're fighting. Some of you are saying you follow me. Some of you are saying you follow Apollos. Some of you say you follow Peter, or you follow Christ. He's like, why has Jesus been divided into factions? Was I, Paul, crucified for you? Were any of you baptized in the name of Paul? Of course not. Why would that happen? I thank God that I did not baptize any of you except for, he names 2 gentlemen. He said, for Christ didn't send me to baptize, but to preach the good news, and not with clever speech, for fear that the cross of Christ would lose its power. And so like he's basically calls them all later on fools for being divisive. So we're being foolish. We are almost saying I follow Christ, but I also follow my group. Not necessarily saying my group is better than yours, but I just think my group is for me, and your group is for you. We're gonna follow Christ in our own way, and we're gonna shape God to fit our group. So as long as you do the same thing over there, and we don't intermingle, we'll be fine. That's kind of what it feels like we're doing. And I kind of feel like just even reading that's we would be getting a letter. Hopefully only 1 Corinthians. And we wouldn't be getting a second one because hopefully we learned the first time around.
Yeah.
But like, so even like reading that, like he's saying, stop doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I only came to do what I do because of Christ. And so should you. You shouldn't be worried about these little individual things that you all want to put your faith in besides Jesus that you think would be better than not being unified. He puts unity on a platform. He said, Christ being at the center and all of you being around him. He goes, this is what's important, is this idea of unity. And so like when we're talking about like creating more opportunities to have that cross-generational wisdom passed on, like, you know, in my young adults group or in my youth group or wherever the young people are at, inviting the older generation to come and invest. Hey, would you like an opportunity to come and say X, Y, and Z at this group? Like, I don't know. I feel like that the Bible is pretty clear on generational wisdom. And if you have something to be passed down, then I'd love for you, like, you know, giving those opportunities, I feel like it's a really great step in the right direction. But also like this idea of like, you know, we have to put effort into not only creating those opportunities for the older generation, but we have to pursue a relationship with one another too at the exact same time. Yeah. Like me and you. Mm-hmm. Like not necessarily the boomers, but that too.
Right.
But
Yeah.
also, like,
I mean, we have to, for us millennials, like most of us are in our 30s, you know, we're like 25, 30s now. And like, we got to pick it up. Like we got to step up. Like we're going to be leading this country. We're going to be leading, if not, we're already leading in churches and stuff like that. And what are we going to do about this generational gap?
Yeah.
Are we going to be okay with it? Because like I'm not okay with the fact that I like have like I've seen this divide essentially, you know, like, and what are we going to do about that? And you know, what do you guys think as well? Like, what are some things that you see? Like, what are your thoughts on like this generational gap thing as well? We would like to hear about it, but go ahead. You had a thought.
Well, I'm even like just thinking, like you just said, like the church is going through its right now, I would say, hopefully it's passing the baton.
Yeah.
I would say that most boomers from a leadership standpoint are probably moving out of their leadership positions right now. Yeah. Like now, probably over the next couple of years, and that baton's being passed on. And hopefully we're even passing the baton on to the generation after that already. Mm-hmm. So like that idea of like, how can we solve this now? Do we really want millennials to be taking the baton from the generation before them and us to still have a disconnect with Gen Z? And if there's a disconnect here that we haven't solved, well, then there's only going to be a disconnect with the generation below me, with Gen Alpha. Yeah. Like, so like that idea of like, oh, we're building church. Also, you are you're next in line to start leading. Basically, your whole generation will be the ones basically at the forefront of the Christian church in the U.S. I mean, and most of the globe probably. So that being said, like, how much more important is it to make sure there isn't a disconnect between us? Yeah. Because guess who you're going to be pastoring?
Right.
Me.
Right.
My generation.
You know, you want to know like some of the like just the insane things that were going through my mind when you said like the idea of responsibility of having to deal with that, and I get it. Like as a millennial, we're so tired. Like that's gonna be the theme. We're so tired. But like, you know, the fact where it's like, yeah, like we're gonna be responsible for it, and like, what is that gonna look like, and how are we going to take care of that, and how are we gonna pass that down to you guys? You know, it's a big issue. I think it's something that we need to get to. Like, how do we reach Gen Z, even how we reach millennials right now? Like, hey, you gotta have like an online presence. You gotta be real though. Like we can't have like these fake moments. Use tech for good purposes and for good reasons. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Yeah. But like reach them where they're at. How they communicate is different, you know? So, there's a lot, and I know there's a lot more than what we discussed on here. But yeah, like I see the need of it. And I think really what just needs to happen is really just lower down the pride, lower down like, you don't have to have everything figured out. It's okay to talk to people. It's okay to welcome in different perspectives and people that are not the same age as you. You'll be surprised what you learn. So,
I feel like the next step for any like young people listening would be, hey, go up to somebody older than you this week at church and tell them that, hey, I'd love to learn something from you. Like, I believe you have wisdom, and I want to come in the humility to possibly receive some of it. I think that's a huge first step. And not only building relationship, but also bridging this invisible barrier that seems to be there of we shouldn't talk to each other. We should just stay in our own group. That seems like not what we should be doing. Like, let's not stay in our own group. Let's go and invade the other person's group.
Absolutely. But what do you guys think? How are you guys doing this? Have you guys seen any success in trying to bridge this generational gap? What are our listeners, doing, or like what are they seeing? What are their thoughts? I'm very curious to read as we get to hear what they're saying. But we appreciate you guys as always. This is Honest to God. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and I hope you'll have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, morning, night.
Morning, night, evening.
Celsius. No, that's just an energy drink.
Fahrenheit.
Before we go,
we need to name this guy.
Yeah, we still don't have a name.
So
we would love for you guys to help us out.
Name him. When this video goes up, I'll put a poll on Instagram.
Okay.
And you guys can submit names. And then the next episode, that'll be the first thing we do.
Sounds good.
We name it.
Sounds good.
Whatever it is.
Sounds great to me.
Cool.
I love it. All right, y'all. See you later.
Goodbye.